I mean, I'm reading this the history of jazz book, and
Ted Gioia.
Yeah, it's fantastic, but it's thick and it's dense. I mean, this is not a large, tight book. And I've been reading on this for a while, and I'm only on page 142, and I'm only into the swing area here. But I'm learning.
Yeah. I don't mean to break your train of thought.
Go for it.
But yeah. I've got a great story about that book. So in 2006, January of 2006, I was reading that text because I was getting ready to teach a jazz history class at University of Rhode Island. So it's hard to believe, but I was on tour with Artie Shaw Orchestra, which is like, it's one of the white big bands from the 40s. Yeah. But the band was based in Boston, and I was there. A friend of mine was the tenor player, and he asked me to sub. So I went out on 3 gigs to Michigan. So I was reading that book on the bus while I was with the band. And it was so funny because he said some pretty horrendous stuff about Artie Shaw's band. Yeah. So like, we're in the middle of the concerts, and I was just kind of thinking about what he was writing about, the simplicity of the music, and it's just repetitive, simple music. But Artie Shaw was a rock star in his time. I mean, it's a hard time for us to believe these guys with their pants hiked all the way up to their chins. The guy played clarinet. Like, how uncool is that? Right. But like, he married like 7 supermodels.
Yeah. Sold millions of records. Yeah.
Yeah, and he made so much money. I think he retired and lived for 50 years on just the money he made. So I'm sorry, it's just so funny you're reading that book, because that's what comes to me.
For sure. Well, it's great that you had that, that insight into it. That's really cool. Who was in the band at that point?
In Artie Shaw, well, Artie Shaw retired for years, and so he picked this guy whose name was Dick Johnson to play clarinet. Dick Johnson was a great New England clarinet player, and it was a pretty big honor. I was sitting in the saxophone line with a bunch of guys that have just died in the last few years. They all had 2 hearing aids. This is a different era of music. This is something my students would never know. They had these brass blaring at their ears for years, and so they were deaf. But they were basically like the Boston Pops saxophone section, which was cool. But the thing, I tell my students this all the time. This is old school, So the guy who I sub for, this friend of mine, Ed Harlow, he said, look, don't mess up, because if you mess up in the concert, the lead alto player is going to take the saxophone out of his mouth and stare you down in the middle of the concert. So we were at some place in Michigan. There were hundreds and hundreds of people, and the other saxophone player messed up. And I was like, oh no. And sure enough, the guy, I can't remember his name, he pulled the saxophone out of his mouth, and he looked over and he let all those 400 people know which saxophone player messed up. I mean, that's some old school stuff,
Oh,
that's
sure.
That's a little more whiplash than the current situation.
Well, one of the things that I learned from this book is that, those band leaders were hardcore, and it was in a very real way a competition. They would literally have battles between the bands where, they would sort of go back and forth, and, one band would win. I don't know exactly what that meant, but it was a very, very competitive thing. People coming to dethrone other bands, and it meant, I guess it meant, gigs at places like the Cotton Club and, all around the country. But it was a super intense atmosphere.
Yeah, I think it's a different time, but the other side of it was, I like to use these examples, like Stan Getz. He pulled his family out of poverty by playing the saxophone. Like that would never happen in a million years now, And there were so many working musicians, and I guess the good thing about being our age or younger is we don't know what it's like to lose all of our gigs. Those guys really lost their gigs, the guys that were playing events, and I say guys because I don't think there were a lot of women, but the people that were playing gigs in the 50s, that stuff really dried up, and so I feel for them.
Yeah, well, especially now, right? Or until now. Now people have lost all their gigs, and so it's a whole new world